Hello and welcome to this edition of Inside Tacoma. I'm your host, Randall Lewis. Our guest for our conversation today, Senator Steve Conway. Welcome back.
It's great to be back.
It's been a while since you've been here, but we couldn't have you on when you were running for re-election.
Right.
But you successfully did that again. Now, how you've been in the legislature?
This is my 26th year.
26 years, wow,
Yeah.
okay.
I actually spent 18 years in the House, and I'm now in my, with the election, I'll be in my third term in the Senate, so.
All right, and in the Senate you have to run every 4 years.
Every four, right.
So that saves you the campaigning need, but we were talking about this a little before the show. You get a little out of touch with your voters, do you think, if it's every 4 years versus every 2?
I think when you're running every 2 years, you have a chance to touch base with your voters and get their vote of confidence. When you're running in the Senate over 4 years, you have a bigger gap, and it's important, though. I think it's always important for us to come back to our voters and meet with them and talk with them and get that vote of confidence. And I was very pleased to see the last election result that I got a good solid vote of confidence from my constituents.
Right around 60% is what I recall. Yeah. Okay. So, what were they telling you? What was on the voters' minds when you were talking to them this year about what issues did they want you to focus on?
Well, I think most of the issues, of course, we're all concerned about rising property taxes. I think that's a big issue that we all need to be concerned about because of rising property values in our area. But I think probably the biggest issue in our district is the rising cost of health care and our need to address that issue with them. And I think that there is, there were any number of issues. I think, our district, the 29th district, which I represent, has both the city of Tacoma in it, as well as the city of Parkland, as well as the unincorporated areas of Spanaway and also Frederickson. So it's quite a complicated district these days. And so, we have a number of issues. I think what I really ran on is my service to my district and addressing their issues and addressing the local issues that they have. So I was very pleased. I was also very pleased by the turnout this year.
Pretty amazing.
It was amazing. I saw the account in the newspaper saying that the turnout equaled what we did in 2010. That's great. Almost 72% statewide, 68% in the Pierce County, and almost 55% in the 29th district. That is very good. Wow. And I'm very pleased by that because I think it shows that the public is becoming more interested in what's going on in their world and what's going on in politics. And to some degrees, I thank President Trump for that.
He has heightened people's interest in elections.
Yes, he has.
I think it's fair for people, if we had to characterize a legislator in a way, that you're kind of a pro-labor legislator. Right?
I worked for 22 years negotiating contracts in the grocery industry.
That's what your job was before you're a legislator. You've been chair of labor committees in the House and in the Senate, and so it is kind of your thing. Your district is, would you call it a blue-collar district, really? I mean, South Tacoma certainly was always thought of as a blue-collar part of Tacoma.
It's largely, there are a lot of retired labor union members. I think the new district we're in unincorporated Pierce County, we have a lot of military families, a lot of veterans in our area now, too. I mean, it's pretty complicated. I think that, my background, I serve as the chair of the Select Committee on Pension Policy. That's a big issue in Olympia. I'm also on the Select Committee on Veterans and Military Affairs because of my district, because I have so many active military and also veterans living in my district. But I also have served on the Commerce and Labor Committee for almost all the years of my career in Olympia, and that has been one of my passions, is to protect and to expand collective bargaining for people. To me, this is an issue of addressing the inequity of income. And our district has we need family wage jobs for my members for my families in my district. So that has been a real passion of mine and a real commitment that I have.
Okay. Now, the results of the election in this year have been that the Democratic Party will be in control of both the House and the Senate,
right,
which you were last year. Last year was the first year the Democrats have been in control of the Senate for about 5 years. But that was a short non-budget year session. This year will be the longer budget year session,
right,
and Democrats will be along with the Democratic governor, writing the budget for the state for the next 2 years. That's the major policy document that passes each year. So let's talk about some of those issues that you're going to be kicking around. I'm going to guess that you're not done with McCleary yet.
No, we're not done with
K-12
McCleary. We have school funding as a major issue. I think this is a budget issue, a budget year. We're going to be writing a $48 billion operating budget for the state. We're going to have about a $3 billion capital budget. And we have now, because of the issues during the initiatives and a potential for a transportation budget that's much larger. So budgets are going to be the major issue in the session of the legislature, and I think one of the big issues, of course, is ed funding. Unfortunately, we've seen we need another McCleary bill, especially for my school districts. The fact remains is that the McCleary settlement that we did 2 years ago did not fully replace the lost revenue from the special levies, and so we are going to be going back to that issue in Olympia and working on. I have all my districts are saying the same thing to me. We need help in meeting the needs of serving our children, and I think one of the priorities of the legislature is its funding for K-12. You should know that of that $46 to $48 billion budget, half of that is K-12 funding. So I expect that we will be involved in that. We had unfortunately a 1-week strike here in Tacoma, and certainly several of us, the delegation, Pierce County delegation, spoke up at that time and said we will go. Yeah, we will be going in a bipartisan way to Olympia to try and fix this funding issue for our Pierce County schools. And everyone, we're going to have. We will be meeting with our schools during the interim to talk about the policies that they think they need, and we'll be working on that issue in Olympia.
Right, and it's not just the per student cost. The formula that came up in the bill that was passed last year had some odd little features to it that drove more money to some districts in the state and less to places, urban districts like Tacoma and others in your district, Bethel and Franklin Pierce. Which is kind of odd because there's certainly less wealthy districts than some of the ones that got more money.
Right.
But when we had the governor on here recently, and the discussion was, any major policy bill usually gets tinkered with the following year because things didn't all get done the first time right, and people figure it out over time and they come back and do it. So it's really not a surprise that you're going to have to come back and do McCleary again, but it's really kind of called home to you because you had a strike in your district and all of your districts are saying, yeah, this isn't working for us.
Right.
So
I would say that, it took us 3 decades to shift the basic education funding from the legislature to local levies, and it's probably going to take a little bit of time to get it right in terms of shifting that responsibility back to state funding and off our local levies. But the critical thing is not to undermine the quality of education that we have in our schools currently. So we have a commitment, need to have a commitment to ensure that all our children have the same opportunities and not get ourselves hung up by the fact that we fixed McCleary, because it's not going to be fixed overnight. You're absolutely right. And I think that, to me, one of our primary responsibilities in Olympia is to fund our schools, and so it'll be a big issue down there. Not to say that it won't be the only issue down there.
No.
We had a very successful session last year. We passed a lot of major bills. I think the two that come out most often is pay equity, and we passed the Voting Rights Acts. We actually passed many bills that affected the voting this last year, in terms of making it easier for people to register and vote. But I think as we move into this next session of the legislature, we have some issues that we have not yet addressed. I think rising prescription drug costs is one of those. We still haven't really done anything in our state to address that issue. I think that'll be a big issue. I think we're going to be working a lot on this whole issue of trying to figure out a way to improve something called Career Connect, the bridge between high school and jobs for kids, and to figure out how we can do a little bit more on investments in our career and technical education in our schools so that we can improve that transition. Kids should be able, after when they're in high school, to figure out where they're going, and our employer community is beginning to recognize that career education in our schools is very important. The governor recently went on a tour in Switzerland, and I don't know if you visited with him about that, but he has gotten very interested in their work that they do on apprenticeship with young people. We have mental health issues. We know that Western State Hospital is going to be a major issue in our next session of the legislature. Homelessness continues to be a big problem here. Fortunately, we'll probably have some ability in our housing trust fund to increase low-income housing development, but we also need to look at, from my perspective, a little bit emergency shelters for people, because we certainly don't want them living on our freeways in these encampments. I also think that on the veteran side and the military side, we're going to be working on, once again, the clear zone issue near McCleary Air Force Base. That's a major issue, and I'll let you know that I think that we need to start looking at, in advance of the census, redistricting in this state. It's been my feeling that the last session of redistricting did not help us, did not defend the community element in our districts, and has contributed a lot to the political polarization of our time. So I'm looking forward to this next session of the legislature, and looking forward to the many bills. But as you said, and I agree, is that the budgets will be the major debates in Olympia this coming session, and trying to solve some of these problems. So
let's talk about Western State for a minute, because I understand that they have made an $800 million capital budget request to do upgrades to that facility. They've been under some criticism from the federal government regarding the quality of the facility and the kind of care that it gets. The governor's expressed some interest in wanting to get something done. The city of Lakewood has certainly had a lot to say about people coming out of Western State Hospital into their community. So, I mean, that's a major capital improvement was probably necessary in order to implement some changes there policy-wise, but there's also more to the need than just fixing up the building.
Let's face it, we did not invest any money in Western State for the last several decades, and so the building was not in good shape. And of course, the federal government's come in and said to the legislature and to the state that, you've got to do better. And so I think we are going to probably see, I know that DSHS has made a recent proposal to put in, to really redo the capital structure at Western State. At the same time, I think what's going on in mental health policy is we're recognizing the need for more locally based secure facilities for mental health patients, and a community-based structure. Not just not just a state structure here, but a community-based mental health system. So we're seeing a shift of some of the patients out of Western State into these community settings, but it's going to take us a while to get there. In the meantime, we have to maintain that facility, and we're losing federal funding, you should know, because of what's going on here. So it's a major need for us in the legislature to maintain that facility. I personally am a little amazed by the number of assaults going on the patients and the employees at Western State. And I hope that somehow in this next session of the legislature, as we work on Western State issues, that we can figure out some solutions there. So,
all right. Well, let me ask you, because a few years ago, there was a big issue regarding people coming out of our state prisons, and a lot of them coming back to Pierce County. And former prosecutor Jerry Horn talked about that all the time.
Right, fair share.
Absolutely. And you were instrumental in passing a fair share bill, which said basically if you come out of our prison system, you go back to the county where you entered the system, unless there's some really compelling reason why you can't.
Right.
Sounds like something like that really ought to be how we do this thing with Western State Hospital. Patients coming out of Western State Hospital, I mean, the issue we hear from Lakewood is a lot of them come out of Western State Hospital into group homes in Lakewood, even if they're not from Lakewood.
I agree with that. I think, I think that there needs to be, we've got to be careful here as we try to reduce the patient count at Western State, that we not move people who are unprepared to live in adult family homes into those facilities. And I agree with you. I think there may be a fair share element in that we should be looking at. Part of our problem is a lot of these patients, or the services for these patients are in Pierce County because they've been in Pierce County forever at Western State. I think that that's a potential. I think that, we just need to be careful. There's a lot of pressure on Western State to reduce its patient count, but we need to be careful in the type if these patients are ready for what is not a 24-hour care facility. The beauty of Western State is a 24-hour care facility. You can't put people into community settings who don't have that kind of ability to have 24-hour supervision. We recently had an unfortunate death that occurred in one of these adult family homes in Lakewood, and I think there's a warning there to us to be careful in terms of how we're placing these people. Now, can we apply that to a fair share principle? Can we make sure that some of these patients who are in the state hospital should be returned to King County or returned to Snohomish County or east of the mountains or wherever they came from? I think that's an interesting concept, and I think it's one that the hospital people need to be looking at, because it's truly unfair to Pierce County to have all the burden of this on them. And so I agree with you, Randy.
Well, let me ask, because you mentioned transportation, and that's certainly something that anybody in Tacoma is aware that money's being spent on transportation, because you just have to look or try to drive on I-5. But we're nearing the end of that project, according to DOT. But you do have some issues. 167 has been funded largely. We'll see some construction on that. But you had yet another court case that has driven some discussion about transportation funding, because I've heard the number, again, another very big number of like $800 million to deal with culverts, something people just drive over and don't even think about. But culverts a lot of times block passage on salmon streams, and salmon try to get up them, and then they run into the culvert. And this is something that both states and cities and counties are all going to have to deal with, because we all own these things. And so is that one of the transportation things you're thinking you're going to deal with this session?
I think we're going to see some action on that. I was talking with Steve Hobbs, who will be the transportation chair in the Senate, and I think he plans to address some of this issue. The question is here, revenue. Our revenue stream for transportation is pretty slender these days, so that's a pretty heavy ask to talk about $600 million. But there is a lawsuit out there. I will let you know that you asked me earlier about one of the big issues in my district is congestion in South Pierce County. At rush hour, our arterials are overwhelmed on Pacific Avenue, on many of the roads that are in my district right now, and congestion is a major issue. What I'm hoping to do, I took a ride here recently with Steve Hobbs to look at transportation issues in Pierce County, and one of the projects that I think we should accelerate a little bit is that Canyon Road. Because that Canyon Road is apparently, the plan is to connect that into that 167 development and help those people in South County finding easier access onto I-5 than going around the Tacoma Dome. And so I'm hoping that we can help that project along, because I think it'll help relieve some of that congestion that we have in South County, which is a major problem. And in fact, I'm really concerned about all the development going on in South County right now. One of the issues, of course, is Brookdale Golf Course conversion to housing. And, there's a lot of resistance in the community to that because of the concerns about its impact on congestion on those roads. And the county really hasn't figured out those solutions yet.
Well, and now let me ask that question because you're probably more familiar with it because you've been talking to your constituents about. Tacoma faced that a while back. There was a proposal to build hundreds of homes on a golf course in northeast Tacoma.
Yeah, I remember that.
And
North Shore.
yeah, one of your colleagues over in the House when he was on the City Council had a few words about that and some issues concerning it. Representative Jake Fye. And the question that came up was that the golf courses have been receiving a considerable tax advantage to being a golf course because they provide open space, they provide, the golf courses actually provide a lot of environmental benefit. We won't talk about the pesticides and all that kind of stuff just right now, but there's a good thing. So they receive tax benefits for that, and so there was some concern about maybe the law needs to be changed that if you're going to convert that use to something else, you have to pay back some of those benefits.
I think that's a great idea. And I'm hoping the Pierce County planners are listening in on this conversation because, that golf course out there has received the same tax advantages. And yet right now the plan is moving forward to convert that into housing. And, at a time when we have so much congestion in that area, when our schools, such as Bethel, are having a hard time getting their levies approved to build adequate school buildings for the children they have in a growth area, when our police and fire services in those areas are being stressed themselves because of the growth that we have, I don't think this is the time for us to be looking at eliminating a golf course and converting more of it into housing. There's been a problem there that the county has not had an adequate conversation with the community out there on this issue, and I'm hoping that in the next several months they will, because I think you're absolutely right about maybe paying back the tax. Right now, it is privately owned, this golf course. The North Shore, I think, was a publicly owned golf course at the time, if I believe that was the case. And so this is a major issue out there in the Parkland area and the Spanaway area of that golf course being converted into housing without, on top of all the problems that area is having with police support and also fire service is pretty good out there, but there's been a lot of criticism from about the lack of adequate police oversight in those areas. So I just think that your idea is a good one, and I hope our Pierce County friends are listening in on this conversation. We'll
check with Representative Fye because he had some thoughts about that back when he was a city council member. So.
I will.
But because there's all sorts of other kinds of growth issues that the whole region is experiencing. One of them is, of course, affordable housing and homelessness. As you mentioned earlier about homelessness, but affordable housing is a key thing. And I've heard some talk amongst the various other ideas of fixing a long-standing problem in Washington, maybe in the next legislative session, which is that people don't generally build condominiums anymore in Washington because we've had this issue regarding liability laws in the state regarding condominiums. And the Washington law needs to be adjusted before builders will build condominiums. So it's a housing choice that's not available here because of some structures with problems with the law here. So you think this will be something?
I think it will be addressed. We actually have had a caucus retreat where that issue came up, and there are people working on that right now in our, well, I'm not sure what committee. I think it's in the Financial Institution Committee, but I think they're working on that condo issue. You're absolutely right. I don't know. I'm not as familiar with that, but I think it needs to be addressed, and it could help us expand our affordable housing needs here in our state. So I think it will be addressed. As I said, you should know we're in the process of reorganizing in Olympia right now because
always after an election.
We have new members, and we have to figure out what committees we're going to have, and we're going to have to figure out what committees people will be on. That's our committee on committees. Fortunately, I'm on that committee on committees this year, and I think that but I know that policy on condos is being addressed. There have been stakeholder meetings on this issue, so I expect to see legislation in the next session on that.
All right. So if you're on the Committee on Committees, does that mean you make sure that you yourself will continue on the Ways and Means Committee, which you've been on for the last few years?
I've been on Ways Committee, and it is my priority committee to be on, because it's a committee that deals with funding on its schools, it deals with funding on mental health, it deals with many, many big issues, and it has been an honor to be on that committee. I am kind of the resident pension expert, because I've been chairing and vice chairing the Select Committee on Pension Policy, and of course pension issues go directly to that committee, so that's one reason I've been on that committee for so many years, is because of my work on our state pension system. And
well, you're also the vice floor leader.
I'm called Vice President Pro Tem in the Senate.
Vice President Pro Tem, okay.
Which is elected by the Senate itself on a
not the caucus, the Senate.
The Senate.
Okay.
Part of that reason is seniority. I've been in the Senate. I'm ranking in many ways in the Senate now. And it basically, the Vice President Pro Tem is when the Lieutenant Governor is not available because he's out on a visit somewhere, the President Pro Tem runs the Senate floor. And if the President Pro Tem is unavailable, then the Vice President Pro Tem steps up. So I consider myself, kind of like the waiting in the aisle. I'm waiting in the pictures box there for my time to throw the ball. And so, but it's an honor to be the Vice President Pro Tem.
You're one of the relief guys.
I'm a relief for running that Senate floor. I've run it a little bit in the last year. I hope that maybe I'll be running it more in the future. But I'm very pleased with my committees. I also serve on the Healthcare Committee and also the Commerce and Labor Committee and those committees. But also, I should let you know, I'm on the Gambling Commission as well. I represent the Senate Ds on the Gambling Commission.
Oh, okay.
So, got quite a few ways in which I influence policy in Olympia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew about the pension one. I guess I didn't know about your service on the Gambling Commission.
Right.
So, but you one decision that's already been made here when we're recording the show is that you've elected yet another Spokane legislator to be the majority leader of the state Senate, Andy Billig.
Yeah.
And there seems to be this kind of if you're from Spokane, you have a pretty good path to majority leader, both Republican and Democrat. In the time that I've worked for the city of Tacoma, they've had 3 majority leaders from Spokane.
Well, the issue is really, we want to have leadership not only in Seattle,
right?
And of course and from King County, because let's face it, a large number of our Democratic representatives and senators are from King County and from Seattle. So I think the balance is found in having someone outside that, and I think that's what's kind of led to the interest in Spokane and their representatives. Some of them have been there for a while, and given their seniority, they are able to lobby for that. Andy Billig was our assistant to our last majority leader, and she was from, as you know, Vashon Island in that area, Sharon Nelson. So we always want some balance, and I think this year Andy had served as our deputy leader, and that was what set him up for being our majority leader.
And with that, Senator, we're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Our guest has been Senator Steve Conway. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Inside Tacoma.